Welcome back to the Messy Reformation. My name's Jason Rice, and I'm the lead pastor at Faith Community CRC in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. My co-host is Willie Cronky. He's a member at Pease CRC in Pease, Minnesota. We're just a couple of guys who love the Christian Reformed Church and want to see Reformation happen in our denomination. But we realize that whenever Reformation happens in the history of the church, things get messy. And things continue to be messy in the Christian Reformed Church. So we're taking the opportunity to have conversations with pastors throughout the Christian Reformed Church to find out what's going on in our denomination, but also to talk about what Reformation might look like. It's also important for you to know that you are our marketing plan. We rely on you to spread the word about what we're doing at the Messy Reformation. We rely on you to share our content. And we rely on you to give us 5-star reviews and give good feedback for our podcast. You are the marketing plan. You can also support us financially on Patreon or Substack. All of the money raised is used to further the mission and the platform of the Messy Reformation. With all that said, we're going to get to this week's episode where Dan and I reflect on the opening session of Synod 2025. Well, guys, we've got a special episode coming to you today on the Messy Reformation, and you'll get a few of these this year where Dan and I are going to be commenting on things happening at Synod 2025. We're not going to be as faithful as the Abide Project guys who are posting every night afterwards, but you'll get a pre, mid, and a post-Synod update as we typically do. And so since last night was technically the opening of Synod, they had the gathering of delegates online on Zoom. Dan and I thought we'd want to pop in and give everybody an update. Well, we'd encourage you to go over and check out the Abide Project update too. That might be even a more thorough than what we're doing. We're going to be giving kind of initial reactions and thoughts to what happened last night. And the Abide Project gave the Messy Reformation a shout out. So thanks, guys. Richard Britton said his favorite Messy Reformation episode is Stephen Terpstra on it. So if you haven't listened to that, go back and listen to Stephen Terpstra's episode. That would be great. But I guess I'll just throw it to you, Dan. We've got Dan. Dan is an expert at Synod now, having served at a few Synods and served on as an officer last year as second clerk and on the program committee leading up to this Synod. I guess I'll throw it over to Dan and ask him, what are your initial thoughts after last night's meeting?
Yeah, it was a well-run meeting. We had Nate Van Dennen, who's the president pro tem this year. And so, yeah, I mean, if you go over and listen to the Abide Project's version 2, they'll talk about how his church, which is First CRC Chatham, I believe, over there in Southwest Ontario, or Ontario Southwest, they are celebrating their 100th anniversary this year. And so normally their pastor gets to be the president pro tem. And they've, even though they're a bit of a distance, they're about 2.5 hours from Ancaster. It's still good to have him. But yeah, getting into the voting, it was some really long voting. It was 100 minutes of just action-packed fun, Jason. That is the only way to describe it. I will say the first 20 were about the practice vote, the 5 favorite foods, all starting with P, and they picked pizza. So I don't have to wrestle with that. That's a wise decision by the Synod already. It shows me promise for the life.
Pizza is always the winner. It should be, right? For favorite food.
It should.
I even ate pizza while watching the vote. So, I mean, that's how dedicated I am.
Speaking of which, I was too, actually. So,
well, looky there.
But no, so from there we get into the president and vice president comes from a common slate of 12 names. And the clerks also come from a common slate of 12 names. Now, if you're watching close enough, you heard only 10 when it came to the clerks, but we heard throughout that time Stephen Terpstra, who ended up being the president, Ken Benjamins, who ended up being elected vice president. Both of their names must have been on the clerks list as well. But so I'm already giving that away. That's who got picked. Stephen, we know from last year, he was the vice president of Synod 2024. And so now he'll get to step up and take the lead, take the gavel for the majority of Synod this year. And then Ken Benjamins. Ken is another guy who has faithfully been at Synod. I've talked to people and they were like, I'm pretty sure he's been up there before. And like, of course, spreadsheets, Jason, spreadsheets here.
That's right.
I know for a fact he has not been an officer of Synod, but he certainly is well qualified for this.
Yeah.
Paul Vanderklay did give a nod that hey, maybe he should lose a chance at this because he does get to sleep in his own bed at night. Ken Benjamins is close enough, and that's a fair point by Paul. But Stephen did the same thing last year. Just to pull back the curtain there, Stephen went home at night. So
that's right.
The juicy background information here from Dan.
Yeah, I think let's just hang there a little bit because I think both of those guys are really good. I'm looking forward to seeing them lead Synod. I think, and like you said, maybe Ken hasn't been an officer, but Ken is so involved behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
He was for the last 3 years. I know he's been regularly communicating with Kathy Smith on different procedural things and paying attention. And even I still remember Synod 2023 when Ken wasn't even a delegate. He was there at Synod for the whole meeting. And so like, this is a guy who's been devoted to Synod for such a long time. And he really knows his stuff. And I think he's going to be really good. And Stephen Terpstra as well. I don't know if many people know, I should be careful because I don't know if he's finished it, but I know at least he was working on his PhD. His PhD thesis was on Reformed Church polity.
Oh,
and I don't know if everybody knows that. And so again, it does make sense for Stephen Terpstra to be kind of leading the charge on that. And Synod has seemed to, that's been a pattern, right? You think of Derek Buikema. Derek Buikema started off, served as a vice president in 2022. And then when his name came up again, people said, hey, he did a good job. We want to see him as president. And so, and I think just in general, the officers, and I guess I'm just going to build Dan up a little bit, but the officers did a really good job. They ran a really great meeting last year through some really hard stuff and it seemed chaotic. I know behind the scenes, I was told it was like the duck's feet under the water, but as the meeting was going, it was run really well. And so it makes sense for us to see for Synod to go, hey, we want to see one of those officers leading us again as president.
Yeah. I mean, it's such an important thing. We get to see too, we watch what's out there on social media about the back and forth of how people perceive us. And I know how people perceived us last year too, right after the vote for officers happened. And, when you pick 4 white males from the Midwest this year, again, when we have 4 males, all pastors, but I will say there's good representation. 3 of these guys are born and raised Canadian. Stephen, while he's serving now, he was in, over in Borculo in Michigan last year when he was serving. Now he's over in Orange City, I believe at First CRC, Orange City, Iowa. So. He's been serving in American churches for a bit, but he still has his Canada card on him, I'd say. So that leaves Josh as the only tried and true American when it comes to the clerks. And so that's important. But I think what people, what people may not understand who haven't gone or haven't gone through the experience, and this isn't by any means talking out of turn. I mean, when you register for Synod as a delegate, you put down what your interests are, so that can help kind of create the advisory committees, but you also put down your willingness to serve in different capacities. And obviously, as you would expect, the big capacities are, I'm willing to be a president or vice president, and I'm willing to serve as the clerk of Synod if that would come my way. And from that, then, so the denomination, the Office of General Secretary or Synodical Services, takes that information, and then if I'm remembering correctly, then, they'll bring it all together, and the delegates have kind of a second step where they nominate from that list. They nominate who they think would be really good. And so it's not just, hey, I think I'm really great at being a clerk, and so put me forward. No, they have to be nominated by their fellow office bearers. And from that list, I imagine we don't get perfectly 12 and 12, but the office is of the denomination is looking at that, looking for, who's well qualified, who brings good representation. and all those things. And so that's how we get to those lists or those slates of 12 and 12. And Jason, just, I mean, looking at the list this year, I'm seeing gripes out there about, well, there's no women, there's no diversity in terms of ethnicity out there. There was one woman on either slate, and that was Luann Sankey. Luann Sankey is also the only deacon, the only non-pastor in the entire bunch of both president, vice president, and clerk slates. And so Luann was the second clerk from Alameda. I think that's how you say it, Alameda, California, Central California classes. She served as second clerk in 2022, did a great job from, I think, every appearance. I did miss her. She was going to be on I was on the financial matters committee, and we missed having her on that. But so there wasn't, in terms of gender, there wasn't diversity in what in what the Synod had to pick from. And that represents too, just the general makeup of Synod this year. I want to say it's Kent Hendricks maybe had published already. We're kind of on the decline of women being delegates to Synod. So that's just a reality to the mix. Maybe it shows something, maybe it doesn't, about general feelings in the denomination. But in terms of, that we have 4 white men who are a little bit older. Again, I think there's a little bit maybe putting Josh into too old of an age group for what he is. But
we can call Josh old. That's fine.
Yeah, sure. I have made the comment, Synod so bald. So that's my hashtag.
That's true.
This event. So except for Steven. Steven's got a little bit of hair up top, but no, that's kind of the behind the scenes look at how that whole process goes to even get to that point of being elected. Synod, as you said, like, we really appreciate experience, and especially when we're dealing with hard things. We aren't just going to put someone up on the stage or behind the desk just because, oh, they're a woman, like that's their qualification, or because they're black, or because they're brown skin. Like that's not why we do these things. I remember when Juan Sierra, I think it was Juan Sierra, when he was interviewing with you, or when on here, I want to say he said something to the extent of like, hey, you white brothers seem to know what's going on at the denomination, so we'll let you do that. You enjoy that. You go right ahead. We'll stick to our local church. I believe that was him.
Yep.
And so part of that too is, right, last year I had a great opportunity as a second clerk to have some of those meals with some of our ethnic minority groups in the CRC. Love them, treasured that time. But I think they would admit, like, just there is a language barrier, there's a cultural barrier that they don't feel confident enough and comfortable enough to be in those kinds of positions and put their names forth. And so we can talk about whether or not that's something we should work on. I think it is something we're wanting to move on as we care about diversity in the CRC. But as things are right now, I think that just we need to have an awareness of, we're not picking these people because they're men, because they're white, because they're from any specific place. But I do think we're picking well-qualified people. And again, trusting the Spirit in that process. So.
Yeah. And I think people probably should realize there's not a lot of people that want to be in either of these positions. No. Right? It's not like we have half of the delegates saying, please pick me. I want to be president of Synod, especially after, I think there's, I don't know the numbers, I'll just say, but my guess is after Synod 2023, when that Synod went so difficult and so poorly, and, the officers of that Synod came under a lot of heat.
Yeah.
I have a feeling there's a lot of people who are like, you know what? I don't want to touch that. I don't want anything. I'll show up. I'll vote. I'll do my stuff in the meetings, but I don't want to be an officer. And so that just limits the pool. And so there's a lot of people who just are like, that's not my gifting.
Yeah.
And,
I think, having served in that, and I think I said it in my interview, you guys had me one of the first episodes after Synod last year. It's lonely, especially on a difficult Synod. It is long hours. It's a completely different Synod experience than if you're a delegate. Even when your friends are there, you don't get to go hang out with them. There's no Canadian Bible study really for the officers, and it's a tough. It's a tough job, and I think you're right. I think less and less people are interested in doing it, and part of that too is recognizing their gifts. They say, "Look, I'm not going to do that." And this time too, right? As we're continuing to deal with important matters. Delegates are also considering their placement on the advisory committee. Again, that was stated in by Zach King at the end of the meeting the other night, of how the program committee report is out, and that is confidential. There's a watermark confidential on it, and so don't talk about it. Don't because we don't want lobbying, we don't want outside influence. But that's a reality. As a delegate, if your name is up and you say, yeah, I think I could do that job. If you have an important place on an advisory committee, or usually a more interesting committee than financial matters, there's a desire to stay on that committee.
Yeah.
And so that's something that delegates wrestle with.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so let's move on. We've got Stephen Terpstra, who will be serving as president of Synod, and Ken Benjamins as vice president. And then we've got a couple of clerks as well. Why don't you talk about that a little?
Yeah, so like I said before, I gave it away. Josh Christoffels is back as first clerk. He was the first clerk last year. I do not have the back-to-back stats on how long it's been since that's happened, but Josh did a great job last year, and I look forward to him continuing to do well in that position this year, in that role. And then we have Gary Van Leeuwen. Gary Van Leeuwen is another Canadian up at Nobleford CRC in Alberta. Which we got to find out is the oldest Canadian CRC. So that was pretty cool. They have, they are, I think they're either 120 or 125 years old this year, 120. And so quite a good deal, and his name, watching the votes come in, his name was kind of up there the entire night. And so it wasn't a surprise to see him. I don't know him at all, but wasn't a surprise to see him get that second clerk role.
No, it seems like, my assumption, I don't know Gary either, but it looked like he has a lot of Synod experience. He had been to Synod probably 5 times or something.
Yeah.
And then being another Canadian too, I think having this Synod up in Canada, there was a desire to see some Canadian delegates being represented there. And so I think, again, it just keeps pointing back to the fact that Synod wants experienced officers, people who at least are experienced with Synod. Being officers. And so they were looking through and saying, well, these guys have been there quite a few times, or they've either served as an officer. And so we want this meeting put in good hands who can capably and faithfully lead us through. And so, yeah, I'm excited for the slate of officers. I think they're going to do a really good job and lead well. And I would encourage everybody to be praying for them as well. Absolutely. As they, one of the most important things that comes out of us, this new way of doing Synod, where we hold the opening meeting through Zoom 2 weeks ahead of, or maybe 3 weeks now, is it gives the officers that the officers get picked, and then it gives them that few week period leading up to Synod to prepare and to think through and to and that's going to help these meetings be led more effectively. For those who don't know, what was happening prior to this is that the officers would be chosen on the Friday morning of Synod, and then they would have to dive in and they didn't know they were going to be officers until Synod started. And so it was a real quick turnaround, where now they have a few weeks to prepare and come into Synod feeling ready to lead it. And I think that's probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, I think the old joke was, under the old way was, you might, if you were on this slate of nominees, you might bring along a couple ties or a couple extra collared shirts and throw them in the bag just in case you need them, and maybe an iron then. But no, it's such a better way, especially last year and these last few years. The officers got asked to hang around for a meeting at the end of this meeting this week. And if I remember correctly, last year, the officers, I think we had a pretty lengthy Zoom meeting the following day. And we met at least one, if not 2 other times before in-person Synod, just to get our bearings. There is so much. And to kind of do that on the fly. I'm so grateful that we've switched to doing it this way.
Yeah. I think it's great, even though there's always some beautiful technological glitches as people are trying to figure out how to vote. And there's usually some funny moments as you're watching, as people forget to mute themselves, and there's been a few historic ones over the years. This year, nothing too crazy. We had a few ads. I definitely heard a few commercials pop up in the background. And
you think
Synod
makes money off of that? Can we use that?
I don't know.
Prices?
What the worst part of it is you know exactly who it is because
Yep,
when their mic comes on, they come to the front of the screen, either their name or their face. So you always feel kind of bad, but it does give me a little bit of a giggle.
A good comic relief in the midst.
That's right. Everybody, you have to be able to laugh in some of this. I'd love your opinion on one thing, because one of the technical glitches, maybe, or I'm not even sure, it came up a few times where other delegates in the voting were bringing up concerns. They're like, hey, this isn't, the numbers that we're getting aren't totaling up to the total number of delegates we have. And so there was a little conversation about that where it seemed like it was falling. Not everybody was voting, or maybe there was still some technical, people weren't sure. They were worried that some votes were not getting counted or not coming through. And, you served as second clerk at last Synod. So one of the things that you're doing is watching the votes coming in. You're I think you're in charge, right, of resetting the vote counters and all of that. Yeah. And so you've got some insight into what that looks like typically.
Yeah. So on Thursday night, or on Wednesday night, rather, sorry, we heard, I believe we heard the number was 168. There at one point early in the meeting, there were less people in, but I think 168 was the top number that came out during the meeting. And so Nate Van Dennen, the president pro tem, mentioned, our majority then is a vote of 85 people. And yet, 168 is still pretty shy of where we should be, right? If every classes had 4 delegates, we're talking about 196 people. So we're already 28 short on that number. But then we saw vote totals for a while. I would say it kind of hung around 150. At times, especially toward the end, we were hearing 140, 141. And so you're talking about 18 votes that are missing. And all I can say, I obviously I wasn't in the room. I'm pretty sure the denominational folks were in the office in Burlington, and they're kind of, that's the hub there. But I've said, when you're at Synod, there's always there's a similar number of votes that don't come in regularly. And so that may, delegates may be out in the washroom, to use that Canadian word I found out about. I didn't realize they don't use restroom, but washroom. Or people are out stepping out for a phone call or whatever it might be. There's times where you don't have everyone in the room for a vote. But there also are technical glitches, even in the room on campus. Anyone who's been to Synod the last at least 3 years, probably before that too, like this comes up. And so yeah, it's a significant number, right? When you're talking 18 to 28 votes missing, you're talking somewhere between 10 and 16% of the votes not coming in. However, I would trust the synodical services staff to be watching that. And I think Nate gave that space too. He waited. Hey, are there any more votes coming in? And I think in the room, right, in person when you're at Synod, but also now, I think if someone really couldn't get their votes through, like over and over again, the staff are really, really, really willing to work with you. And I think you'd be able to submit your vote, through a private chat or something like that. They were trying to get every vote possible counted. And so those votes that didn't come in, yes, it's a significant number. But I wouldn't give that there's any reason to worry or think something hinky is going on.
Yeah. And I think
there's no Dominion ballot boxes over here.
There you go. Now you got everybody so upset.
Yeah.
No, I think it's just helpful for people to realize that it's kind of a normal thing. Actually, nothing. It's sad because it makes it hard because of the technology and there's little glitches and stuff. And yet, on the other hand, as you were hearing the vote totals at the end when it was coming in and you had duos and stuff, it was pretty clear either way. I mean, it was clear enough that even if we had not quite hit the magic number of 85, President Pro Tem Van Dennen was like, I'm just going to call it and you can challenge me on this because it seems close enough, and nobody was challenging it. And so, but I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah. For anyone that wasn't watching, I mean, that only happened that we know of on those last 2 votes. So every vote went 3 rounds for president, for vice president, first clerk, second clerk. And it was the 3rd round for both first and second clerk that we couldn't get to that 85. So we didn't get to the magic number, but as Jason said, yeah, Nate gave it to to Josh and to Gary, because it was clear enough on their end to see what that total was.
Yeah. I mean, and that's really all that happens in that initial meeting. I mean, there's a lot of other little business details, and the meeting eventually gets handed over to the president, and he encouraged people to prepare well for Synod and prepare well for their advisory committees, because that's the majority of the work that you're going to do. And I think that's very wise advice. That's the advice that we give every year on the Messy Reformation. And Dan and I are going to be recording another pre-Synod video giving advice to delegates here in a week or so. And we're going to give that advice again and say your primary influence at Synod is the work you do in your advisory committee. Yep. And so I appreciated Stephen encouraging members to do that. And what are your thoughts after last night and looking at some of the things coming up at Synod? What's on your mind, and what do you think people should be paying attention to or maybe praying about?
Yeah. So I will give the caveat that this is the least prepared for Synod, even as a non-delegate. This is my least prepared I've ever been. But I really appreciated Aaron Vriesman and Chad Steenwijk's interview last week or earlier this week, whenever it came out. That was great. Just to give us a rundown and get people thinking, get the delegates thinking about why, how do you approach some of these views? What is kind of the context in our denomination that has brought these things to the forefront? And so I think that's really important. I think, as you said, the delegates need to be well prepared, and not just for your advisory committee, right? You have to be prepared for the entire agenda. Again, it's difficult because people tend to see the book agenda and there's a supplement that comes out, and there are reports that are going to hit these delegates in the days ahead of, whether it's right to comment or this group is speaking into something. There's, I remember my first time at Synod, all of a sudden realizing, I have to actually pay attention to the Synod website because it doesn't just populate to my email or something. You have to be paying attention at Synod for these reports as they come in. And so that's why as an officer, it's really hard because, at least the last few years, again, we have quite a bit less work this year, hopefully. But you can't, right? We don't go advisory committee 1, advisory committee 2, advisory committee 3. There's times where you're jumping around. And so it is, I remember probably last year you recommended staying, kind of physically active, try to stay engaged just to, if your body's right, your mind's going to be right, or hopefully. But that is helps. Really important. You've got to stay on top of this stuff. And so someone else on another Facebook group asked, what's just the general consensus about getting ready? And someone said, take it easy on the Canadian Bible study. And if you don't know what that is, that's perhaps a time to drink and socialize afterwards. But don't think, this is great, I can go out and spend, a few hours out on the town. No, have those times of fellowship, but then get back to your room, get back to the reports, and get ready for the next day. And I just think it's really important. Again, a lot of people come into Synod, especially our elders and deacons, and they are, they've been willing to go. They're usually, they're somewhat, timid or tepid, whatever the right word is there, kind of excited. But it's a lot. It's a different experience than anything else, especially different than classes. And so I think it's really important, yes, to be physically active there. Don't take every golf. I heard there's no golf carts this year, that the campus is too small, so they don't have golf carts. They'll be doing some walking, which is good. But also just, get your rest as much as you can. Get your rest, come ready to work, because there's going to be some long days.
Yeah. And I think I'll just, I want to point to something else coming out of last night's meeting. I mean, it's been increasingly clear for the last few years, and I'll quote Paul Vanderklay, I suppose. His comments kind of coming out of the election last night is the vibe shift is here. And I think, the vibe shift is here last year for sure. It was kind of, but I think, again,
do you define
people
vibe
who
shift there?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, we're shifting from. I mean, you can see the delegates each year, right? It's a younger group of guys every year coming up, and it's not these older guys who have been seen as kind of the pillars of our denomination, right? It's a new generation coming up, and so I think it's a generational shift for one, and when the generation shifts, there's also then a vibe shift, right? There's going to be a different feeling in the denomination from here on out. And for those who have kept thinking that the last few years were a fluke, I mean, again, it comes out and we're like, no, these are all the guys that we were kind of expecting to be in these positions because we've seen them in leadership. It's this new generation coming up. And so I guess I would tell people, I mean, there's some that are lamenting the vibe shift in the CRC but for those who kind of there's also people who are just kind of uneasy at it, coming up to every synod thinking, oh, maybe things are going to go bad at this one, and maybe things, and there's always this kind of uneasiness. And I just want to kind of encourage people to realize, no, I think that the denomination has shifted significantly where we're not in a position where, I mean, yeah, things can still go sideways and people can make poor decisions, but the leadership in the denomination has changed at Synod for sure, and I think that's going to keep filtering on up into the rest of the denomination, and so be at ease. I've been thinking a lot about lately. Eventually, maybe I'll write something, but I'll give you a little blip into it. For those who are pastors. A lot of people kind of flinch when they remember their time studying the foreign languages, studying Greek and Hebrew. I love languages. So actually I loved those classes. So I'm a weird,
Jason. Good for you.
I'm a nerd like that. So I loved them. And, but a lot of people kind of freak, right? And, one of the most helpful things was in Bill Mounce's book, Basic of Biblical Greek. In chapter 2, he talked about the fog of learning a new language. And he said, here's what's going to feel like. Each week you're learning something new and you're feeling like, I don't know this. And because you're learning so much new every week, you feel like you're never learning anything. And it feels like it's kind of in a fog. And he said, what I want you to do each week is flip back 2 chapters and look at what you learned 2 chapters ago. And you'll all of a sudden go, oh, I know that stuff. That's really easy. But it's because you're always learning new stuff that you feel like you're never learning anything. And I've been applying that and trying to tell people the same thing goes with Reformation. There's like this fog of Reformation that happens where, there's always work to be done. There's always something on the horizon. There's always decisions that need to be made. There's always an opportunity for someone to make a poor decision. And you kind of start to forget of all the progress that has been made. And I was reminded of this recently. We've picked up a few new subscribers lately, and one of them messaged me and said, "You know what I did? I just went back and I started listening at episode 1, and I've been binging my way through. And I kept finding myself saying, why are you guys so worried about this? We're not even dealing with these issues anymore. I don't understand." And he said, I had to realize this was 4 years ago,
over 4 years,
almost 5 years ago.
Insane.
And so I've been just encouraging people, not because we need more downloads or anything like that, but I think it would be helpful. We keep them all on there. Every episode we've ever recorded is on there. And you can go back, scroll back to those episodes in 2020. And for one, you'll notice the quality is way bad, but listen to the conversations and be reminded of how merciful God has been in this denomination and the work that he's been doing. And so it may feel like we've got a long uphill pull ahead of us, and we probably do, but don't forget of what God has been doing here for the last 4 years, and be encouraged, because I truly believe he's going to keep doing that this year, and he's going to keep doing that next year.
Amen.
That's all we have for this week. If you want to help us out and support the Messy Reformation, another thing you can do is sign up for our newsletter through Substack. That way you'll get episodes and summaries sent directly into your email inbox. It also gives us the ability to communicate with our audience, which is one of the biggest struggles of a podcast. So head over to the Messy Reformation on Substack and sign up for our newsletter. But until then, don't forget this is Christ's church, and he bought it with his blood. And we've been warned that wolves will come in trying to destroy the flock. So keep a close watch on your life and on your doctrine. Preach the word in season and out of season, and keep fighting the good fight in this messy Reformation.